Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Bangladesh is back on the agenda for Cut the Clutter, and we are taking a view on one particular aspect of the issue there, and that is the aspect of the freedom movement or freedom struggle in Bangladesh. How did Bangladesh get freedom? Who got Bangladesh its freedom? Two questions arise from this, which we'll be examining today. One in some detail, one in not so much detail, but principally so. So the first question is there one history and one understanding of how Bangladesh won its freedom, either in Bangladesh or in India? And the second question is, do the Bangladeshis owe their freedom or their coming into existence or the creation of their country to India and should be therefore eternally grateful to India? And if they seem to be asking India questions or not being fully accepting of anything India wants or says, does it amount to a lack of gratitude? So that is the half question. The first question first. Now imagine the situation in our country. We had a long freedom movement. By and large, we know who the prominent leaders were. By and large, Mahatma Gandhi is seen as the most preeminent of these leaders. He gave it not just political direction, but also its strategy, Satyagraha, for example, non-cooperation, also its strategy, Satyagraha, non-cooperation, peaceful agitation, peaceful approach to freedom movement. That was the strategy, and also through that, he brought in the moral authority. So yes, Mahatma Gandhi, a preeminent leader, almost nobody in public would deny it. At the same time, there were many others. There was, on the other side, people who did not believe in such a total peaceful freedom movement. There was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, Ras Bihari Bose, so many others. Now, these arguments go on. In fact, a very large school of politics and ideology in India would believe, it still believes, and they are in power right now, that Veer Savarkar, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, and the followers of his ideology also played a stellar role in India's freedom movement, which has been denied by the writers of the contemporary Indian history because that was all done in the Congress/left era. Now, you can believe in one side or the other side, or little bit in this side, little bit on that side. This argumentation and contestation goes on, which is healthy in a democracy. It's going on right now. At this point, in fact, it's at its most intense because, as I said, Savarkar's followers are now in power. And once you have the state power, then you have that much bigger or higher a stage to make your point from. That said, suppose a government came into India, a regime came into India, that said that there will be only one history to our freedom movement. So and so was the leader. It could be anybody, A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z. That history will now be written based on what so and so did and the approach of so and so, and everything else does not matter. In fact, in the process, some of the others might then even be painted as traitors for having indulged in acts of what might be called treason, assassination, etc., and condemned and forcibly forgotten like that. If that happened, what would the public opinion be? Won't that leave our politics so divided, and won't it then spill over to the streets in so many ways? Because people will say, look, I don't buy it, plus who the hell are you to decree that there will be only one history of our freedom movement? That's precisely what happened in Bangladesh in about last 15 years, increasingly so. Because Sheikh Hasina Wajid, the daughter of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the great leader in so many ways, the founder of Bangladesh, also Bangabandhu, the brother of Bangladeshis, father of the nation as well. She used political, executive, dictatorial power to create a monoculture of thought around the Bangladesh freedom movement. It's as if just Mujibur Rahman and his people, the Awami League, had made it possible. Of course, they had played a stellar role. Of course, Mujibur Rahman spent time in jail in Pakistan. However, there were many others. If you see the contestation in Bangladesh right now, even the protesters, many of them are questioning this because she then made sure that Sheikh Mujib's portraits and busts were everywhere. There were songs about him, there was praise for him. If you came to Dhaka airport, for example, on the public address system, you heard his speeches being broadcast all the time. So this cult was built. The fact, however, is that Bangladesh freedom movement was also a complex story as in most countries, and in this case, because it involved two more countries. It involved a neighbor, which is India, and also a sibling, which is not a neighbor, which is across a large territory called India, but that was a sibling, that was West Pakistan. Also, this was not a peaceful movement. It might have started as a peaceful protest earlier, but soon enough it became a military effort. Now, what is for us in India a 13-day war? Formally, the war began on 3rd December 1971, ended on 16 December 1971. So formally, it's a 13-day war. Maybe the war was waged without being announced. There was an unannounced war going on for several weeks before that and intensifying progressively until it became a formal war. That said, for the Bangladeshis, the armed conflict, the armed resistance or the armed liberation war began on the night of 25th March 1971 and ended on 16th December 1971. So what was a 13-day war for us formally in India was a 9-month war for Bangladesh. You might say maybe a few more weeks for India, a low-scale conflict along the borders on East Pakistan side, but really a formal war for 13 days. Who was fighting this war for Bangladesh? Now that's an important thing, and that we can either spend 2 hours talking about it or we can work on a documentary. I hope somebody does, and maybe we'll do it at some point of time. But the fact is that a lot of the Bangladesh freedom movement was fought in the villages, on the streets, on the highway crossings where ambushes were carried out, and all of this was done by Bangladeshi guerrilla fighters. Many of these were simple civilians, boys who rose from villages, but who was organizing them? And where was the real firepower coming from? India helped, of course. India gave weapons, India gave training, India gave refuge. But at the peak, Bangladeshi armed freedom fighters under two organizations, Mukti Bahini and Mukti Fauj, they were about 110,000. These are very conservative counts. Many of them, most of them were trained in India. Those in Mukti Bahini, which was more like a specialized force, they were trained under Major General S.S. Oban, who was a specialist. He had also founded the Special Frontier Force, the Tibetan Force, after the 1962 war. These were also people with whom later Major General Shubheg Singh worked in training them. These were purely guerrilla fighters. So there were these forces fighting in Bangladesh, and they had been harassing Pakistani army, inflicting casualties, and creating the conditions for the Indian army to move in when the time came in. And they were the scouts, they had the information, they were telling Indian army about every movement of the Pakistanis, and they made that victory possible in 13 days. Their role was widely acknowledged by the Indian army, by Mrs. Gandhi, by everybody. Now, if you look at those people, they had a bunch of officers. These were officers who came out of former Pakistani armies. Some came out of the Pakistani army, that is the mostly East Bengal regiment of Pakistani army. They were also called Royal Bengal Tigers. Highly decorated regiments when they fought for Pakistan. And some came from East Pakistan Rifles, which was a paramilitary force like the BSF. These troops and their officers en masse, you can say defected, but they didn't defect to anybody else. They en masse became a freedom fighting force, and they had some weapons and they had some basic training. So many of their leaders also then became key freedom fighters. I can't go into an exhaustive history, but I will give you 3 or 4 names because some of these people also got demonized over time. Now, the most prominent of these was Ziaur Rahman. Think of the history of Ziaur Rahman. Ziaur Rahman was a 1955 graduate of Pakistan Military Academy. He was among the top 10% in the academy, a very good student, trained to be a commando, a paratrooper, trained with military intelligence. He commanded a company in the Battle of Khemkaran in 1965. And in a battle where Pakistani armed forces actually suffered very heavy setbacks, his company, East Bengal Regiment, a company of East Bengal Regiment, he was then a major, his company actually did brilliantly. In that battle, he won a Hilal-e-Jurat, which is Crescent of Courage, or the Pakistani equivalent of Mahavir Chakra. Just that one company, 150 people, got 3 Sitara-e-Jurats, that is the Pakistani equivalent of Veer Chakra. Sitara-e-Jurat means Star of Courage, and 8 Tamga-e-Jurat, that is Medal of Courage. So 8, 3, 11 and 12 gallantry awards for just one company. His own, the Pakistani equivalent of Mahavir Chakra. Now, let's leapfrog time. He comes back to East Pakistan, he's posted there, he carries out cyclone relief, his unit carries out cyclone relief. 1970, East Pakistan has that awful cyclone. But then, on the 25th March, when Pakistan declares martial law, launches Operation Searchlight and atrocities on East Pakistan, people of East Pakistan, that night he declares a revolt. He declares a revolt and actually makes a first announcement saying, I do hereby declare the independence of Bangladesh on behalf of our leader, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. However, before that, he had made a tiny slip. He had said, as the provincial head of government in Bangladesh. Then he corrected that because he faced a pushback on that. Then he corrected that and he said, on behalf of our supreme leader, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Mujibur Rahman, by this time, had been arrested, taken to Tezgaon airfield in Dhaka and flown out to West Pakistan. So he became, in a way, the first senior soldier to revolt and start fighting, and that's how Mukti Bahini came into being. In fact, as he declared his revolt, he started by shooting his battalion commander. He was the 2IC, second in command. He shot his battalion commander, a Colonel Janjua, and then carried on from there. Now, for what he did in Mukti Bahini, I will not go into the details, but for what he did for Mukti Bahini, for the freedom of Bangladesh, he was given Bir Uttam. Bir Uttam is Bangladesh's highest military award that can be given to a living being. So Bir Uttam. Again, like the Mahavir Chakra, so an unusual man who got the second highest gallantry award, or the Mahavir Chakra equivalent, from 2 countries. One from Pakistan for 1965, one from Bangladesh for his role in the freedom struggle of 1971. It is that Ziaur Rahman who later, after a series of coups, and I will take you through that, after a series of coups, became the strongman of Bangladesh, ruled it for about more than 5 years, right? And then ultimately was himself assassinated. She did not assassinate Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. I will take you through that. It's a very complex history. I'll try and do it as quickly as possible, of 3 coups in 11 weeks. I'll take you to that. But the second character who will feature in this history of 3 coups in 11 weeks will be Major General Khalid Musharraf. Major General Khalid Musharraf was again second in command of 4th East Bengal Rifles at Comilla. He also revolted on the night of the launch of Operation Searchlight and Pakistan Army crackdown. Then he became a sector commander for Mukti Bahini. They all came to India to be trained, to be given over their command. The provisional government of Bangladesh. Those days, all newspapers had the dateline Mujib Nagar. Mujib Nagar was nothing but a building in Kolkata, address being 8th Theatre Road. That is where the provisional government was running from. Many of these commanders operated from bases in Tripura, in places not very far from Bangladesh border. In fact, Zia for some time was in Sabroom, which is at one end of Tripura bordering Bangladesh. Now, Khalid Musharraf was one of these majors. He was wounded while fighting for Mukti Bahini. He lost a leg. He was brought to Pune. That is where he got his treatment. Finally, was given an artificial leg also. And then, once Bangladesh came into being, he was reinstated in the army and rose higher, quickly became Major General. He was also awarded Bir Uttam, or the Bangladeshi equivalent of Mahavir Chakra, for his role in the freedom movement. Then there is Abu Tahir. Abu Tahir became a colonel. Before that, he was an officer. He was a major with Pakistani army in Abbottabad. Abbottabad is where the big Pakistani academy is. He, along with a bunch of other officers, they from Abbottabad crossed the border. They found their way across into India and then went to Bangladesh to fight again via Indian training camps or through Indian controllers. At one point, he also got a bullet in the head, right, which he survived. Now he rose to be Chief of General Staff in the Bangladeshi army, and I will tell you that story of 3 coups in 11 weeks in just a minute, because that at the end of it, some of these people were not living. They did not survive. He also was awarded the same gallantry award, Bir Uttam, the Bangladeshi equivalent of Mahavir Chakra. Now, besides these, there were 7 others. There were 7 others who were awarded Bir Shrestho. Bir Shrestho is the Bangladeshi equivalent of Paramvir Chakra, which can only be given posthumously. In India, it's mostly been given posthumously, but there is no condition that it will only be given posthumously. In Bangladesh, it seems to have been the case at least until now. And the people who won this posthumously, Captain Mohiuddin Jahangir, Sepoy Hamidur Rahman, Sepoy Muhammad Mustafa Kamal, Lance Naik Munshi Abdul Rauf, Lance Naik Muhammad Ruhul Amin, and Lance Naik Noor Muhammad Sheikh. The 7th man is very interesting, and that's a fascinating case. That is Flight Lieutenant Matiur Rahman. Flight Lieutenant Matiur Rahman got Bir Shrestho, which is the highest gallantry award, posthumously of course. So how did an Air Force officer land that award, the highest award? His story is fascinating. He was posted in Pakistan as a flight lieutenant at one of the Pakistani training academies. Now this training academy at PAF station Masroor, he saw a young Pakistani officer, a pilot officer called Rashid Manhas, getting ready for his second solo flight. Rashid Manhas was 20. Flight Lieutenant Matiur Rahman was just a few years older. So he just asked him for a ride because he was an instructor on that airbase. So he asked the young pilot for a ride. He hopped into the plane. It was a Lockheed T-33 trainer. And as the plane took off, he took control of the plane and he tried to divert it towards India. Masroor is in Karachi. The young pilot, the pilot officer, he realized that something was wrong and he figured that the plane had been hijacked by a senior and was being taken to India. Flight Lieutenant Matiur Rahman's idea was that he will take this plane to India and then join the freedom movement. And he will also bring the plane as a trophy and maybe a Pakistani pilot as a prisoner as well. This young Pakistani pilot radioed his base saying the plane had been hijacked. The base asked him to relay that message so they could trust that this was true. He did that. This young Pakistani pilot and the Bangladeshi pilot, the pilot officer and flight lieutenant, they had a scuffle on the plane in the process of which the plane crashed just about 32 kilometers before crossing the airspace of India. Both of them died. Now, Flight Lieutenant Matiur Rahman, as we told you, he was awarded Bir Shrestho, the highest posthumous gallantry award for Bangladesh. Rashid Manhas, in fact, became the youngest winner of Nishan-e-Haider, which is the highest gallantry award on the Pakistani side. So these 2 young officers, these 2 young pilots got their respective countries' highest gallantry award in the same situation because they were involved in exactly the same situation on one plane, one wanting to take the plane in one direction and the other one trying to prevent him from doing so. So this is the very complex history of this freedom movement, because behind Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, behind the Awami League, behind all the stellar work they did politically, and they suffered a lot. Lots of people suffered. My friend Mahfouz Anam, who is one of the eminent editors in Bangladesh, he is the editor of the largest selling newspaper, editor and publisher, the Daily Star. He himself was a freedom fighter as a student. So lakhs and lakhs and lakhs of Bangladeshis were freedom fighters, but they were not necessarily all in the Awami League. So to say that only the Awami League must get the credit, or the founder of Awami League must get the credit for all of the freedom movement and for getting freedom for Bangladesh, is not right. And this answers our second question also. Heroically, Indian armed forces fought. India played a central role in making this possible, the arrival of a new nation possible. India provided political support, diplomatic support, training, tactical support, strategic support to these Bangladeshi forces, and finally India employed its armed forces in their full might. In that war, according to a statement made by George Fernandes when he was defense minister in parliament, Indian armed forces lost 3,843 lives, 3,843, with 9,851 injured. So this was a very big price that India paid. So nobody can undermine India's role, but to say that India won Bangladesh with this freedom is also not fair, and that is something that Bangladeshis resent greatly, particularly those Bangladeshis who are young. About 70% of Bangladesh is today below the age of 50. They were not even born when 1971 took place, and for them to believe in only one discourse of this freedom movement, one, that only the Awami League did it, and second, that Indians got us the freedom, that is difficult to understand, because they know from their family histories, from oral history, that there were so many Bangladeshis who died fighting to create their own nation. So their role can't be undermined. I told you about that 3 coups in 11 weeks. It's an involved story. I will try and tell you in 3 minutes. In 1975, by early 1975, Sheikh Mujib had become a kind of a dictator, because he was creating a one-party state. Bangladesh had a lot of economic problems, social problems. It was a war-ravaged country. It had been ravaged the previous year by a cyclone and Pakistani neglect for such a long time, and then Pakistani atrocities, complete destruction of its economy, flight of its capital, flight of its talent, etc. So he was struggling to manage the country. He declared a one-party state, and so his party, Awami Party, now became something else. It morphed into something called Baksal, or Bangladesh Krishak Shramik Awami League. Now this was a one-party rule where the party controlled everything. All other parties were banished or banned. So many of the young officers who had fought in this war, including Ziaur Rahman and Khalid Musharraf and Abu Tahir, all the names that I've mentioned to you, many of them felt very disappointed that this had happened. So this led to the first coup on 15th of August 1975. That's when Sheikh Mujib, his family, they were all assassinated, and these young officers took over. However, with that, the Bangladesh army lost its cohesion, because in any case, many had jumped from major to major general in no time, because they had come through freedom movement. A new nation and the army were coming into being. So the hierarchy had not yet been fully established. So while there was a chief, the senior most officer, Ziaur Rahman, was there, nobody was bothering about any of them. All these young officers now thought that they were chiefs in their own right. That is when one of these Mukti Jodhas, again a Bir Uttam winning Mukti Jodhas that we told you about just now, Khalid Musharraf, he by this time had become a major general, and he thought this was wrong, and he thought that he will now call everything to order, declare himself the ruler just for a few days, and then bring in a modicum of order in Bangladesh. He did it sort of idealistically. All history tells us that his idea was not to take over the government forever. So 3rd November 1975, he declared himself the Chief of Army Staff, took over power and said, I will restore order. So this became the second coup, because after the first coup, Khondekar Mushtaq Ahmed had been appointed president. He removed him, made himself Chief of Army Staff and the boss of all his surveys. So that became the second coup in these 11 weeks. The third coup took place 3 days later. He was the ruler for no longer than 3.5 days, because on 7th November, the third coup in that series took place. In the third coup, Abu Tahir, the third officer, Bengal Regiment officer, to get Bir Rotam for Mukti Bahini activity or as a Mukti Yodha, he was involved. So he carried out this coup and he now assassinated with his people. They assassinated Khalid Musharraf. And then they assassinated Khalid Musharraf, who had put Ziaur Rahman under house arrest. So they freed Ziaur Rahman. In the course of time, Ziaur Rahman became free, and first of all, like a strongman military ruler, and then president of Bangladesh. Of course, once he became president of Bangladesh, he very quickly arrested Abu Tahir, tried him in a military tribunal inside Dhaka jail, and very quickly hanged him on 21st of October 1976. So that's how quickly these events moved. However, everybody involved in this bloodshed, was a freedom fighter of the freedom movement, and each one has the following. And Zia himself was assassinated as president on the early hours of 30th May 1981 in Chittagong Circuit House, along with 6 of his aides. After that, a little bit after that, General H.M. Rashad took over as the strongman of Bangladesh. That coup, however, was bloodless. Just as we have the following for Gandhi on the one side, Gandhi and Nehru, and also following for those who picked up arms and fought, sacrificed their lives, or even if they survived, they believed in the idea of armed struggle. That contestation had been put down in Bangladesh. That is now coming back, because you can imagine that many of the younger people will see these soldiers probably as heroes as well, and in many cases they might see them as bigger heroes than even Mujibur Rahman and his Awami League political activists. These complexities, I thought, are important for us to understand when we look at the situation in Bangladesh.